everybody kind of feels like it's one of those things that you never think will happen to you until it does.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon Corner. My name is Paul Thomas. We are going to be talking about gun violence. With us today, Merrick Moses, Whitney Brooks, and Pat Chesbro. Hello. Justin Lane, an African-American member of the Pittsburgh Steelers football team, was recently pulled over at a traffic stop where police found an unregistered gun in his car. He was immediately charged with felony possession of firearms, among other driving-related violations. He subsequently pled guilty to lesser charges. When Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old white man, was done murdering two protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin, he casually walked down the street holding up his rifle while police cars drove past them on the way to the scene. Two different incidents, both involving firearms and police, but each with very different initial responses from law enforcement. Juxtapose these two events against what you observe in macro society. Please share any conclusions you may or may not have reached regarding law enforcement's treatment of people with guns. Merrick?
About what happened in Kenosha. Apparently, people took it upon themselves, a group of vigilantes took it upon themselves to guard, quote unquote, the businesses of Kenosha. That's how Rittenhouse got there. He's not even from Wisconsin, he's from Illinois. And he was driven there by his mother, which I don't know why she's not charged as an accessory. I mean, did he ride back with you? I'm sure he told you that he killed somebody. So I digress. And there's clearly a double standard here.
Is the double standard racial?
Oh, the double standard is definitely racial. I know 16-year-olds right now that are in adult prison for guns and robberies and things like that. And Kyle Rittenhouse just shot somebody and he gets to go cross state lines and chill. And I think about the penalty of that person who had the gun, the football player who had the gun, who shouldn't have had the gun, and what he had to endure. And Kyle Rittenhouse was taking pictures in a bar. Like, this is insane. It's completely insane. And what it says is that there's one set of rules for these men, for these people, and then there's another set of rules for everybody else.
Whitney, two sets of rules?
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's the thing. The history of gun control in this country has always been rooted in racism. I mean, if you go all the way back to pre-Civil War, people who were enslaved were not allowed to own guns for obvious reasons. And then after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and, 13th Amendment and all of that, even free Black folk were not allowed to own guns either. The first group before the NRA to really advocate for the idea of citizens being able to carry guns of all types without interference from the government was actually the Black Panthers. And the NRA didn't like that. So they that was the one and only time that the NRA supported gun control laws was when it was Black people who were arming themselves. And so now that after all that happened with the Black Panthers and that threat was taken care of, eventually the NRA evolves to, be more anti-gun control laws, but it doesn't change the fact that, like I said, it's always been rooted in racism, always.
People with guns, treatment of people with guns, Pat. There's distinction between races?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it was the 14th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was the emancipation one. The 14th Amendment said no citizen can be deprived of any
Due
Right.
process.
And I think that's when that changed. And I just read that today. So that's my little piece of new information. Yes, I think absolutely. Is it different? Yes. Kyle Rittenhouse, first of all, he shouldn't even had that gun. You're not supposed to even have it till you're 18. And so again, for his mother, why did she buy him a gun like that? Why did she drive him to a place like that? And he's 17 years old. Do you think he's fully developed? And when he's afraid of something and he's got a gun in his hand, what do you think he's going to do? I mean, I think and then that they ignored him, that's even worse. But also the penalties, I think, is another piece. We read about the Pittsburgh Steeler guy, but I was listening to this whole stand your ground law thing in Florida. How George, whatever his name is,
Zimmerman.
Phil Trevon Martin, and
Right.
got let go because he was afraid of a kid in a hoodie who had no gun. And a woman in Florida who had been abused by her partner, had been in the hospital more than once. He went after her again. She had a gun. She shot one round into the ceiling, and she was put in jail for 20 years.
Yeah.
So that it's not just even, it's all mixed into all of this racial, whatever.
And misogyny, race and misogyny.
Yep.
Okay, when Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner was asked what it would take for him to support the police in his district, he suggested that a good start would be for police to stop shooting unarmed people in the back. We have been overwhelmed by stories covertly leaked to the press where African Americans were killed in police custody. There's a long list of names I could cite here. Nearly all these stories have falsified police reports as a major component in the attempts to cover up what really happened. If you were given the task of drafting legislation designed to prevent police killings of unarmed civilians, what provisions would you include in that text? I'm going to start with you, Merrick. You're going to write this law. What's it going to include?
It's going to include new weaponry that is non-lethal. It's going to include whole units and subjects of training around de-escalation, even maybe some martial arts, learning how to disarm people. And also too, what I have noticed is there also needs to be a review of the hiring process. Is it wise to make a veteran that just came from Iraq in combat in Iraq, is he or she prepared to go out and be a cop 2 years, a year out of service? What was their decompression period like? All of those things should be taken into account. In addition to having community resource officers like the police athletic league, when the cops used to go around and play with the kids and all of that. Community building is a must. I would also have that in the bill, and I would advocate several $1 million for all of that program.
Pat, you're tasked with writing the law to prevent police killings of unarmed civilians. What would that law say?
Well, I think the first thing we should do is get rid of that whole immunity thing, immunity for police officers. If they say, I was scared of a 16-year-old girl who had a knife, so I shot her. I mean, I was scared of what? I mean, they're just saying, oh, I was so afraid. So I think that's one of the things, is that whole immunity.
Qualified immunity is what it is.
Yeah.
Qualified.
And I think too, some of these things like traffic stops where people get crazy, maybe there's certain police that shouldn't be carrying guns around. And maybe that needs to be, I mean, for heaven's sakes, I mean, what do we train our police to be afraid of people that don't look like them? I feel like that. I think that base of fear is really needs to be figured out. And, you know, as you say, we need lots of discussion about cultural training and why are you so afraid of people who don't look like you? Anyway.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, it's your turn.
So what you're describing, Pat, is called implicit bias. And the definition of that, for any viewers who don't know what that is, it's when you have some kind of bias or preference or even an aversion to a person or a group of people, but it's not something that is necessarily at the forefront of your mind. In addition to, you know, de-escalation training and all that stuff, we also need to put officers through mandatory implicit bias training, which those programs are designed to expose people to their implicit biases and give them tools to adjust their patterns of thinking and to hopefully ultimately eliminate the discriminatory behaviors.
So you're basically saying that there should be some kind of battery of questions that if they show that they are implicitly biased, that should get them off the police force or not have them hired in the first place.
It's not like a questionnaire that you answer, you know, it's not a list of questions that you answer. It's a process that you go through with, you know, some kind of third-party moderator or whatever. It's like therapy, you know. That's probably another thing that we should include is mandatory therapy for officers. But I mean, it's like a group or like a class that you go to, you know, where you're forced to kind of look inward at your own ways of thinking and your own, you know, biases that you may not even be aware of, and then work to try to help undo those.
I remember when I was in the Department of Corrections, we had a lot of training, mandatory training. We needed 40 hours every year. We went through with the officers. And a lot of times when we got onto things like diversity and issues like that they just treated that training as a joke, that really wasn't anything that I mean, the training was there, but they didn't really pay any attention to it or care about it. They went back to being the same asshole that they were, you know, prior to the training. So I'm thinking that, you know, maybe if there is a way to weed out these people who are unwilling to respond to this implicit bias training, I think that'd also be good as well.
I was just going to say real quick that if you know, make your employment contingent on taking the training seriously, I think that would help. You know, like you can't work here if you're not going to take this seriously.
Right. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz recently stated that the main purpose of the Second Amendment was to arm the population in order to facilitate a violent rebellion against the government. He also said that maybe it is now time to implement that purpose. Besides characterizing these remarks as utterly irresponsible and very dangerous, do you think anything additional should be done to this knucklehead for making speeches like this?
Bullshit.
Should
might remind him that he is the government.
Yeah.
So if he wants armed rebellion against himself, he might need to consider why should he be a target of an insurrection? These people that think they're not the government, they are the government. You know, it's not just one person. It's Matt Gaetz is the government. And I think he shouldn't, well, there's a lot of reasons he shouldn't be in Congress anymore. I don't understand why people elect people like that, but I think there should be a way to get them out besides the whole big, long impeachment process. I think if they don't behave responsibly, they should be booted. But
so you think he should be booted? Boot Matt Gaetz, Merrick.
Oh, absolutely. He should totally be thrown out of Congress. He is a sitting representative calling for a violent uprising.
That's right.
There is no Black person in America in Congress that could say that and not be censured or expelled. I'm not sure what Nancy Pelosi is doing, but he needs to be expelled. He's literally called for an armed insurrection. I don't know what else they want.
All right, Whitney, you got to tell me what you think about Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. And I think in addition to that, I mean, calling for an armed insurrection, I think if it's not, it certainly borders on treason, which, you know, I mean, we have rules against that, and you know, there should be penalties for that. So I don't know. I don't know if it's my place to say exactly what those penalties should be, but certainly removal from government office would be the start of it.
Well, at least censure. I mean, they removed Marjorie Taylor Greene from her committee assignments, and they didn't even start that with Matt Gaetz. So.
They take an oath. They take an oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. For him to advocate for armed insurrection is absolutely opposed to that. And they pretend to be so Christian, they put their hand on the Bible and they say that, and then they don't do it.
Well, my cousin, who was like my brother, was murdered in front of a post office when I was 16 and he was 14. And supposedly he was killed over girls, supposedly. That literally shook me to my core. And from there, me and another one of my cousins started a group for young Black men. It was a rites of passage group. That being said, there are so many people that have so many families that are hurting because of this violence. And it incenses me that there are members of Congress who don't have a shred of humanity, who don't understand how deep and how crazy this crisis is, and how they would literally sell their souls for money and not protect human lives. I think that is really the shame of it. And these people, most of these people claim they're Christians and they don't even respect life. If they did respect life, then they would do something about these guns that are killing people, loved ones. I was just thinking the other day, what would my life be like if he was allowed to grow up? And I thought about his wife and his kids, or his husband and his kids, whatever. And he was just snuffed out. No recourse, no arrest. This happened in New York. And so people really need to get to these people and get to Congress and tell them this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. You know, you can go to the state legislatures, but when you look at the red states, Greg Abbott just signed a bill saying everybody can have a handgun. So I don't really trust it. I mean, we need federal legislation, and I'm sure that I'm sure that some of the right will, if it gets passed, outright block it or mount constitutional challenges against it. But the lawmakers, wherever they be, need to know that this is unacceptable.
This was something that that I've become passionate about just out of common sense is how it started, and compassion for human life. And then I went to college and studied criminology and sociology and learned about, you know, all of the differences in I learned about like how crime works in this country and like the root of it, and it's all, you know, rooted in classism and racism, and everybody should be passionate about this, but especially after the Sandy Hook shooting, because, you know, people, if nothing else, people care about children, you know, And I really, really thought that after a bunch of 6-year-olds were murdered, that something would change. And then when it didn't, I thought, well, if that doesn't do it, nothing will.
Just letting the others know that my daughter was murdered. She was murdered at her work when she was sitting in her car. And it was her fiance's sister who shot her 6 times. And I would say, first of all, we need to get rid of the NRA as it exists today. The NRA is the chief leader in more guns, fear mongering. They used to be about gun safety. My husband had lots of guns, but he was in the NRA for years. When they started to go to this perspective that they have now, which is, all rules are bad, blah, 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 he got out of the NRA because it used to be that they were about gun safety. If we want an organization about gun safety, I'm for that organization. That's one thing. The next thing is that we need to make gun ownership sort of, I was just reading something, buying a gun should be like buying a car. You should have a license to do it. You should pass a test that you know about gun safety, you know how your gun works, you know about, blah, 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 whatever, those kinds of things. And you should have a list of all the guns that you have. So we know what guns you have and, everybody, we have to go through all kinds of process to buy a car or get a driver's license. We should do the same thing for a gun. It's more deadly than a car most of the time. So I think the other thing is that I would always argue against the people that say, well, like the guy in the restaurant today, why do you think he had a gun? Because he thinks somebody's going to shoot him. Well, I'll tell you what, if somebody plans on shooting you, they're not going to let you know ahead of time. It's going to be like an ambush and you're not going to expect it. And we're not going to expect it in schools, and we shouldn't have schools where we're always afraid either. So I think that those things are really vital to the thing. But I think the NRA, getting rid of the NRA is crucial to this.
Good first step. Okay, in some states, Texas, for example, America alluded to this earlier, laws are being passed that makes it easier to carry guns than it is to vote. There is a certain political culture found primarily in the Republican Party, and I think Pat referred to the NRA as well, that makes this seem normal and reasonable. Please describe your personal analysis based on your observation of this culture in terms of its contribution to the health of our nation. And Pat?
Absolutely not. It's not healthy to run around with a gun on your hip and afraid somebody's going to shoot you, I don't think. It's not healthy to have you be so nervous that if somebody scares you, you're going to shoot them. It's not healthy that people are being shot in the back because they're afraid of them because they're a different color from them. It's not healthy that we're shooting children for any reason. It's a public health crisis that we're in right now.
Whitney, what about the health of our nation in regard to that culture?
I think it's worth mentioning that that kind of culture is concentrated in certain parts of the country. My in-laws live in, semi-rural Pennsylvania, and, everybody out there has guns. But, I don't know a single person in the suburbs of Chicago that has a gun. I think it really it depends on the area, but I think it's one thing to have a hobby, but when it's potentially dangerous to other people, I think there needs to be some kind of regulation and limitation on it.
Merrick?
This is a toxic culture based on fear. Let's think about this. This culture was here from the beginning of the Republic and even before. and it is based on maintaining a colonizer mindset. That's why you got to walk around with a gun, because the stuff you stole, somebody might try to get it back. And here we go. I just feel that it's ill. It's mentally ill. These people are mentally ill. They have a core that is so fearful that they need to walk around with guns, and not just handguns, y'all. I'm talking about AR-15s. Where was I? I was in Texas and went into this Walmart, and I asked the person I was with, should I expect guns in here? And she was like, yeah. And I asked because I didn't want to go into a situation and I see this gun and I'm shot, and somebody's scared that I'm shot. Next thing I know, I'm the next black guy that's dead. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a very sick culture. And it's been glorified in the movies, you know, John Wayne and Gunsmoke and all of that. And so people have bought into the lie. But you can't, but think about this. America is a country that has never been at peace. So this is, and being in this constant state of stress generationally will cause mental illness. That will develop. And so people really need to delve into the source of their angst. And that is that they are losing the majority and they're scared. They're scared. They know that this country is browning, and and the only thing they know how to do is violence and guns. They think guns are going to stop it, but it's already too.
So is it safe for me to conclude that you all feel that we live in a very sick culture? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of nodding. I can't help but notice a confluence of events. The gradual ending of the pandemic, the insurrection and plethora of Republican-led actions designed to destroy democracy, and the seemingly unstoppable explosion of gun violence across America. Am I just noticing a whole bunch of coincidences? Or is there something more sinister afoot in the United States at this time? Whitney.
You know, a lot of people say that, you know, police brutality against Black folks is on the rise and it's more common than it ever used to be. And I don't think that's just patently false. It's not the case. It's always been there. It's just better documented now. It's the technology that's gotten better to, you know, film these things, and attitudes have changed. So people are trying to, you know, hold more people accountable. And I think that there might be something to that here. I think that in a lot of ways, it's possible that the pandemic is exacerbating those things because, you know, things are opening up now. I mean, we're still very much in a pandemic and people are still dying, but, you know, with access to the vaccine and all that, you know, people are starting to feel safe being out, you know, out and about and around other people. And like somebody mentioned before, after being, you know, more or less cooped up for the last year, I think that there's probably a lot of like tension and frustration that needs to come out. It might come out in a lot of unhealthy ways like that. Sorry, I live next to a hospital, so I don't think that it's a series of coincidences. I think it's something that's always been there, but I mean, maybe it's possible that people are making connections that they didn't before or seeing things through a more critical lens.
Do you think we're in a more dangerous spot, say, than we were like 15, 20 years ago?
Dangerous in what way?
Losing our democracy, losing our freedom, having a society that is mired in violence?
Probably, yes. And I think a lot of that has to do with Trump's presidency and how he, you know, embolden people to, you know, be openly racist and, you know, openly violent against people that they disagree with. And I don't know, it's possible that we would have gotten to this point anyway, but I think that we certainly got there sooner because of his presidency and the influence that he had on his supporters.
So you're thinking that maybe it was headed in this direction, but Trump managed to accelerate it to the point where it's more dangerous now than it might have been otherwise.
I think so.
Okay. Merrick, what's your thought about this confluence that I've uncovered here?
Well, also as a practicing Buddhist, I will say this is America's karma. This land was settled in violence, with the violence and blood since 1619, and even before with Columbus 1492. And so part of this issue is that America refuses to face her own history. So people are acting out of ignorance. And to agree with Whitney, I think that Mr. Rump was the Pandora that opened the box. See, because all of them have his swag now. They can say and do whatever they want. But the problem is all of this does come back to you. We might not see the get back, but they will feel the get back. This, I mean, it's not old, but I mean, we shouldn't be surprised. America has always been a very violent place. And now it's just out in the open for the world.
Pat, bad karma? Finally catching up with America?
Well, I'm not sure it's finally catching up. I think it's always been there. I think we're more aware of it now. We're hearing about it more, and I think that that's probably important. I was just reading in our newspaper just had in January of this year, there were 2.5 million guns sold in America. During the pandemic, the number of guns sold rose by 66%. So this whole idea that that's how you solve your problem seems to be endemic in this country. And I think we've talked pretty much here about gun violence and that somebody doing something to someone else, but you need to not ignore the suicides. There's a huge number of suicides that happen with guns and accidental, you know, children shooting other children or, you know, shooting themselves or shooting. Remember the case about the mother who had a loaded gun in her purse and her little kid picked it up and shot it? 3-year-olds can shoot a gun. We need to have guns that are safer. That's one thing we could do. We could have guns that have your fingerprint or your code, or, I mean, you can't pick up somebody's cell phone and use it for the most part because they have a code in it. Seems like we could at least do that. So, you know, I feel like we are sick here. And I think we've always been sick, and I just think we see it more now. And I think the opportunities for acting on violence are far more available than they used to be, perhaps, although I'm not sure about that either. I think we need to cut back on selling guns and see if we can get people to get along with each other a little bit better. But certainly the Congress is not demonstrating getting along with each other.
Yeah. As far as the suicide thing, I graduated from high school with a class of 16 people, and one of my classmates from that class had a brother who committed suicide with a gun, and another classmate had a son who committed suicide with a gun, and I had a nephew who committed suicide with a gun. So suicide is also a big problem. Hey, it was a great discussion. I want to thank Pat, Merrick, Whitney. Appreciate you guys coming and talking about this very important issue. So all you viewers out there, thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye.
I'm not really worried about that happening, but I'm sure everybody feels that way. You know, like, oh, that could never happen at our school.